When you think of the Nintendo DS and then of racing games, the most likely candidates to come to your mind is going to be Mario Kart DS. But Nintendo's little two-screen handheld was home to many different kinds of racing games. Some good, some bad, some underrated, but the bottom line is there are a lot of DS racing games out there. So today I wanted to compile all of the games I've looked at before and put them all into one DS racing games video. So here you're going to see Need for Speed DS games, some underrated games like TrackMania DS and Sideswiped, Burnout DS, which wasn't quite as good, and many more. So without further ado, let's start with some underrated DS racing games. Let's start with one that was ahead of its time in ways people still don't talk about. So first up, TrackMania Turbo. If you've ever played TrackMania on PC or consoles, you know the deal. It's all about fast laps, crazy stunts, and pure skill-based time trials. Something I'm not particularly good at. No power-ups, no rubber banding AI, just you, the clock, and some of the most insanely ridiculous track designs you'll ever see. But here's the wild thing. In 2010, Firebrand Games somehow squeezed that TrackMania magic into the two screens of the Nintendo DS. And somehow it actually worked. You got over 100 tracks split across 4 different environments, and even a fully functional track editor. On the DS! That's right, you could build your own tracks with ramps, loops, and jumps, and then just race them right away. That level of track editor being on the DS completely blew me away. You know, does it look great in terms of modern standards? No, but on the DS this is absolutely fantastic. It's the kind of feature that felt almost unreal. Now, the graphics obviously took a hit compared to console and PC versions, simplified models and low draw distance, and occasional performance issues. But the feel of TrackMania is right there. The handling's tight, the speed feels right, and I had that sense of just one more try that the series is known for. One of the coolest things for me was how each environment actually changed how the car behaves. Like the desert tracks were all about sliding around, while the classic stadium ones rewarded precision and control. To me, it gave the game a surprising amount of depth for something that looks quite simple. This could have easily just been a conversion of a console version that didn't translate well, but TrackMania Turbo was designed for the DS, and that makes all the difference. It feels fast, focused, and just fun. Honestly, I find it so impressive how much they managed to cram in this game. You could tell Firebrand really understood what made TrackMania tick. It's not about fancy graphics, it's about a perfect flow, and this DS version really nailed it. Unfortunately, it didn't get heaps of attention at release, with VG charts estimating the game to have sold only about 50,000 copies, but the game reviewed pretty well with a 77 out of 100 average on Metacritic. But I'm thinking mostly because by 2010, the DS was kind of already winding down and ending its era. People were looking towards the 3DS, which was launching the following year. If you ever stumble across a copy, give it a go. It's the kind of game that's A, fun, and B, will make you go, how does this even run on this console? Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games, underrated racing games, or the Nintendo DS, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. And whilst you're at it, if you want to be the first to hear about all my upcoming projects, then join my Discord server using the link in the description below. We also just yap about cool games there, so it's always worth a look. Anyway, that's enough plugging the channel, let's move on to our next game. Okay, so now for one of my personal favourites, Sideswiped. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, because it seems to me that most people haven't. This one came out in 2009, published by Majesco and developed by Recom. It's basically Burnout, but on a much lower budget. But honestly, it works way better than it has any right to. The whole idea is completely simple. Cause as much chaos as possible. You earn points for smashing into traffic, wrecking opponents, or just basically flying all over the place. It's arcade-style mayhem with short bursts of fun that I thought were perfect for handheld play. Unlike a lot of DS racers, Sideswiped just goes all in on destruction. And it really puts the Burnout port on DS to shame. Every crash can send cars flying, and it makes me laugh every single time because it just looks so funny. The game keeps rewarding you for being reckless. It was just pure dopamine rush. The art style's pretty cool too. It's got this colourful, kinda cel-shaded look that gives it personality without straining the DS hardware too much. It's almost like a comic book version of a crash derby. And all things considered, bearing in mind how much is going on the screen at any moment, the frame rate is surprisingly solid. You can tell the devs focused on keeping things smooth and fast, even if it meant simplifying some visuals. The missions are all quite short, like 1 or 2 minutes each, but that's part of the charm. It's the kind of game you can pick up, do a few challenges, and put back down again. But it's addictive because you're constantly chasing a better score, trying to chain bigger crashes, or get that perfect run. Or in my case, send as many cars flying to the moon as you possibly could. There's also this satisfying sense of feedback, where the cars explode and bounce about in an almost cartoonish style. It's just fun, really, like unapologetically fun. You can tell it's a game that didn't have a huge budget, but it certainly made the most of what it had. The menu design, the stylized vehicles, the little touches like camera shake, it all comes together to make something quite unique. It's certainly not realistic, but it definitely doesn't need to be. It's arcade chaos done right. If you're the kind of player who loves Burnout mayhem, Sideswiped is a hidden gem you should definitely track down. It's the definition of an underrated DS racer. One that does its own thing, doesn't overcomplicate it, and ends up being way more fun than it looks. I wasn't able to find any review scores for this game, but there's one user score on Metacritic putting it at an 8 out of 10. It also is only estimated to have sold about 10,000 copies as per VG charts. Anyway, let's move on to our next game. So next up, let's talk about Ridge Racer DS. Now, Ridge Racer is one of those legendary arcade franchises that helps define 90s racing. Bright tracks and smooth drifts, and that unmistakable announcer yelling Ridge Racer. So when Namco decided to bring it to the DS as a launch title back in 2004, it definitely made sense. But here's the thing, Ridge Racer DS kind of flew under the radar due to the passage of time, and it really shouldn't have. First off, this game actually feels like classic Ridge Racer. The handling is buttery smooth, like slide around corners with a smile kind of smooth, the kind of smooth I'd expect from a console or arcade version of Ridge Racer, so it's nice to see it's translated well here. It's got that perfect balance between arcade speed and precise control, and visually I think it's one of the best looking early DS games. It's based on Ridge Racer 64, so it's definitely not original, but that's not a bad thing, because that game was already great. The DS version keeps the same track layouts, the same fast-paced drifting, and that same flashy arcade energy, except now you can play it anywhere, and you don't need a big clunky cartridge for it. One thing people forget is that Ridge Racer DS actually tried some interesting stuff with the DS hardware. Like, you could use the touchscreen as a steering wheel. I couldn't get on with this at all, so I just stuck to the D-pad, but hey, it's there if you want to use it. That feature to me kind of felt like a tech demo for an early mobile racer, but it's cool that they tried, and I'm going to give them credit for that. As I mentioned, thankfully you could use the D-pad, which feels a lot more natural. And once you get into that rhythm of power sliding through turns, it really scratches that Ridge Racer itch. Soundtrack-wise, it's pure Namco goodness, upbeat techno tracks that keep your heart pumping while you race through sunny city streets and neon tunnels. It's got that vibe of a game that doesn't take itself too seriously, it just wants you to have fun, and that's the kind of thing that I like in a racing game. The big reason it didn't get more love, in my opinion, is timing. You see, in every region where Ridge Racer released, there was less than 12 months between that and the launch of Mario Kart DS, with there being less than 5 or 6 months in some regions like Europe. Now, in terms of review scores, Ridge Racer DS holds a okay score of 63 out of 100 on Metacritic, and it's sold alright as well, with 150,000 copies estimated to have been sold. But if we compare that to Mario Kart DS, which followed shortly after, that game sold 23 million units. A lot more. But if you can look past the shadow of Nintendo's mascot racer, Ridge Racer DS delivers some genuinely solid arcade action. It's stylish, smooth, and I thought it was a complete blast to play. So it's not groundbreaking, but it's proof that the DS could handle classic style racing just fine. And in my opinion, it still feels good 21 years later. Alright, so this next one might surprise you. Cars Meta National Championship for the DS. Yeah, that's right, we're talking Cars, the sequel to the movie tie-in game on the DS. But hear me out, this version is actually really good. This one was developed by Tantalus Interactive, the same folks who did the Game Boy Advance version. And if you remember that Game Boy Advance port, it was a pretty impressive 3D racer. But the DS version is basically the full experience that the GBA version was trying to be. In fact, the GBA release is pretty much just a scaled down version of this one. They even managed to include that cursed opening cutscene. You know the one.
Ladies and gentlemen.
But here it's actually a real CGI cutscene, not just a slideshow of JPEGs with text underneath. Now don't get me wrong, most of the other cutscenes are still static images with dialogue boxes, but that's totally fine. Nobody was expecting Pixar quality animation on a DS cartridge in 2007. And speaking of that, this came out in late 2007, and fun fact, the DS version actually had the highest Metacritic score out of all the platforms, sitting at a very respectable 69 out of 100. The game also sold pretty well, with just under 700,000 copies shifted for the DS. For comparison, the DS version of the first Cars game only scored a 54 out of 100, which is just quite sad. Now, having played the console version of Meta National, it's a surprisingly faithful adaptation, just without the open world elements. Instead, you end up with a series of compact but well-designed tracks that still manage to capture the Radiator Springs charm. The track design here, in my opinion, is genuinely solid. There are hidden shortcuts, collectible icons scattered around, and some clever course layouts that make it feel like more than a basic movie tie-in sequel. You've got jumps, drift mechanics, and races featuring all the international competitors from the main game. It's light-hearted, colourful, and honestly, a good time. It's definitely on the easier side, it is a Cars game after all, but it's not nearly as mindless as the GBA version was. You can actually get into a groove with the handling, chaining drifts, and nailing shortcuts like it's Mario Kart Lite. Now I do have to mention the one thing that's truly cursed about this game, and I've mentioned it before, the model for Lightning McQueen. Ugh, damn.
Holy God, what are you showing me? His head. Come on.
I'll use the exact same phrase I used last time, and it's just cooked beyond belief. There's just something about it that isn't right, but hey, we love him anyway. Now, as much as I'm praising it, it's not a perfect game. There are a few tracks where the handling feels weird, but the worst offender, hands down, is this one segment where you race in a dark cave at night, because Lightning, as I'm sure you know, doesn't have real headlights, he's got stickers. So he wears night vision goggles, which puts this awful green tinted filter that makes it feel like you're doing a Spec Ops mission on Call of Duty. Cool idea on paper, but in reality it's just awful. I did not enjoy it. But aside from that one race with a weird design choice, Meta National Championship on the DS is genuinely impressive. It's fun, it's charming, and it runs smoothly. And finally, let's talk about Race Driver Grid. Yes, that Grid, on the DS. Now, most people know Grid as a console and PC franchise known for its realistic visuals and deep handling model. So naturally, when they announced the DS version, everyone thought, okay, this is not going to be good. But no, somehow, beyond all expectations, the DS version actually slapped. This one was developed by Firebrand Games, yeah, the same team behind TrackMania Turbo, and honestly, these guys were wizards when it came to DS racing tech. They managed to make a version of Grid that kept the feel of the original, even if it didn't have the graphics to match. You've got a career mode and even proper licensed tracks and cars. And what's crazy is that it all runs smooth, controls well, and looks surprisingly sharp for a DS title. The car models are clean, the environments are varied, and the sense of speed is actually pretty damn good. What really makes it stand out to me though is how refined it feels. The physics are impressive, cars actually handle differently depending on their type, and you can sense weight shifting as you corner or brake. It's certainly not simulation level depth, but for the Nintendo DS, it's way beyond anything I was expecting. They even included a replay feature, something almost no other DS racers had. You could watch your race back, complete with camera angles, and it looked pretty good. It's that little extra polish that makes it clear Firebrand really cared. There's a good amount of content as well, lots of events, multiple vehicle classes, and enough difficulty to keep you invested. It's got that perfect balance of challenge and accessibility. The soundtrack's pretty good, the presentation feels good, and it's a game that genuinely impressed me with how hard they tried and how much they pulled off. And yet, it still kind of went unnoticed, with only 50,000 copies estimated to have been sold. Maybe because people assumed the DS couldn't handle something like Grid, or maybe because handheld racers were just not of interest at this point. But if you're into technical racers and want to see the DS pushed to its limits, this is one to play. The game holds a very nice 79 out of 100 on Metacritic for the DS version as well, which is very good going. It's a game that's proof that with the right developers, even a system with limited hardware could deliver something that felt like a premium experience. So yeah, looking back at the DS's racing library, it's kinda wild how many hidden gems there were and how many quality games are there. You had the creativity of TrackMania Turbo, the classic drift style of Ridge Racer DS, the ridiculous fun of Sideswiped, the surprising amount of polish and depth in Grid, and the unexpectedly great Cars Made National Championship. Each one tried something different, and each one proved that you didn't need fancy hardware to make a racing game that was fun, fast, but also damn memorable. So if you're digging through DS cartridges and spot one of these, grab it because they're all absolutely worth trying. So whilst we looked at Cars Made National Championship in that underrated racing game segment, let's look at the rest of the Disney Pixar Cars games for the Nintendo DS. Do you guys enjoy Cars games for the racing? Well, too fucking bad, bozo, because this is a mini-game collection. That's right, the first Cars game for the DS is a fucking mini-game collection. Barely any racing in sight. This version of the game launched worldwide around the same time as all the others did back in June or July 2006, depending on where you were in the world. This version was developed by Helix, who also develops the GBA version of the game that we looked at the other week. I mean, honestly, I'm not actually surprised this does exist because this was the early days of the DS when everything was about making sure you used the touch controls, and minigame collections were a big thing back then, so I'm not surprised, I'm just kind of disappointed. Well, seeing as we're here, let's just talk about the minigames that this offers. So, the one you're currently seeing on screen is a game where you have to, and I quote here, stroke the cars as they fill up petrol to keep them happy. That's right, stroke the cars. What the hell? You have to quickly tap between the different petrol pumps to make sure you stroke as many cars as possible. I'm really struggling not to burst out laughing whilst reading this, but it's just silly. It's alright, it works, it's just pointless. So next up we have a kind of driving segment where you have to play as that orange muscle car from the start of the first film, who I believe is childishly called Snot Rod. Anyway, you just kind of keep driving, he occasionally sneezes and gets a boost, and the other members of your crew drive past and you have to avoid them. I don't really get the point of the game, and then you kind of just keep driving until you stop. And this one just feels like it goes on for fucking ages as well. Not impressed. So the third minigame I played, it's literally just a memory game. Like, that's it.
I remember this. Almost remember.
There's a traffic light that flashes in different patterns, and you just have to tap the traffic light after the lights have flashed. The only really annoying thing is as the game goes on, the patterns get longer, but the traffic light shakes as you tap it. So sometimes you can misclick on the screen, and I say misclick because I've been emulating this and not been playing it on an actual DS. So it just made it 10 times more difficult. So once you complete these first 3 minigames, you then unlock some more. So the way these minigames work is they have 3 stages.
If you fail at a stage, it will just take you back to that stage rather than restarting the entire thing, which is kind of nice, I suppose. Anyway, so the next thing you unlock is an actual race between Lightning and Chick Hicks. Now, I thought, oh hell yeah, racing, this is going to be good. No, it's a very bare bones experience. I was just happy to see some kind of racing, but be careful what you wish for, I suppose. The concept for this one was actually pretty cool. You have to keep an eye on your tyres to make sure they don't burst. You have a boost gauge that keeps coming and going as you use it, and there is actually a pit stop micro game halfway through the race, although I struggled to actually figure it out at first, which is really embarrassing. But yeah, overall, not a great minigame, but it's fine. Okay, so next up we have a minigame where Mac is driving along and falling asleep once again, which is just super dangerous. Anyway, his rear end opens, oh god, and Lightning's trophies start pouring out, and there's 4 different colours of trophies that pour out, and you have to grab them and move them into the... let's try that again. You have to move them into the corresponding colours. This just goes on for quite a while as well, and the game does have a countdown each round, but like, it always hits 0 and there's still trophies coming. I think the game just ends when it runs out of trophies. There are 2 other minigames that I played during my brief time with Cars for the DS, both of which starred my favourite character of all time, haha, Mater. One sees Mater trying to shoot himself up to the moon by driving very fast and also collecting stars for some reason, and the other sees Mater fishing trash out of the river. I'm not even going to waste time diving into these 2 games because they're just so inherently boring that there's nothing interesting to say about them. And that was all the time I spent playing the first Cars game, so let's move on to something a bit more interesting. Cars Race-O-Rama. Genuinely, I can't decide which McQueen model I actually hate the most between Mater National and Race-O-Rama for the DS. This game just, I couldn't get used to the way it looks, but more on that later. So this is Cars Race-O-Rama for the Nintendo DS, which was developed by, again, Tantalus. It released in late 2009, and Race-O-Rama actually holds the honour of being the first Cars game I actually made a video on, so I know a lot more about this one than I did Mater National. Now, as you may recall, I absolutely grilled Race-O-Rama the first time I played it and did the video. Now, hindsight has given me some wonderful knowledge in the fact that it wasn't that bad. This, on the other hand, is nowhere near on the same level as the console game is. Obviously, it was never going to be, but it's just something about the way this game looks. It just, I don't know, I can't get on board with it. I don't know how they went from the Mater National graphics to whatever Lightning McQueen looks like here. Now, as you can probably tell from that recycled Chick Hicks joke that I've used in nearly every single Cars video, yeah, f*** you guys, I'm going to keep doing it anyway, the story still is the same as the base game. Chick Hicks' rival racing academy takes yours on. He has some bratty sports car girl, a silent muscle car, a big truck that's voiced by Randy Savage, although there's no actual voiceover in the cutscenes in this game. The bare bones of the game is still there. The tracks are all nicely designed, it has shortcuts, there's stuff to collect, you know the gist by now. As it's developed by Tantalus, this game is very similar to Mater National, and that's a good thing. I personally prefer Mater National over this one as a handheld game, just from the way it looks and the way it runs. Honestly, Mater National runs better than this one. That said, some of the level design is a bit more detailed. There are some reflections that can be seen on the models of the cars, which is actually quite impressive for the kind of game this is and for the platform it's on. But overall, I much prefer Mater National to this. However, Tantalus still did a good job of bringing this game to a handheld platform. I must say the points mechanic in this game is really cool. How you hit top speed, you get points which add up to your boost, how you hit drifts, and just that whole system it's very well done. Obviously it was in Cars Race-O-Rama, but it's done very well on the DS as well. Honestly, I'm just grateful that these 2 games exist, because the first Cars game on DS is just a joke. So the fact that we got 2 full console games pretty well adapted onto the DS is very impressive. So technically, in terms of Metacritic review gatherings, the DS version of Race-O-Rama actually holds the highest score out of all the games so far, but that's only because it's had 1 review, and that 1 review is 70 out of 100. For comparison, the 360 and PS3 versions of the game hold 54 and 61 out of 100 respectively. Anyway, moving on to our final game, Cars 2. Okay, so last but not quite least, we have Cars 2. Now, this DS port was actually developed by Avalanche, who developed all the other versions of the game as well. I recently played through Cars 2 on the channel about a month ago, and I had a pretty high expectation for this game to be quite similar, having just played the previous 2 DS ports as well. What I got was in fact not a port of the console game, but in fact its own thing. Honestly, I've sat on this for a few days now, and I still don't quite know how I feel about this game. It's such a mixed bag that it's hard to really recommend it, but at the same time, it's weirdly impressive for what they were trying to do.
I don't know.
So let me just elaborate on what I mean. The console game very, very loosely follows the events of the film, but it's kind of just you doing missions and races with no real actual purpose except to just progress further through the levels. This game actually follows the plot of the film, where there are actual missions based on such insignificant moments. There's a whole segment on Meta driving to get to the wasabi for the pistachio ice cream joke.
Do not eat the free pistachio ice cream. It has turned.
Don't get me wrong, what follows is a pretty significant moment in the film with the oil spill, which to me overall is quite impressive, but it does mean that there are some incredibly boring and frustrating segments of gameplay involving stealth and almost platforming. I don't know, man. Honestly, I was just hoping for a bit more of a watered down version of the console game, but this is just weird. I do just want to talk about how the cars handle in this game compared to previous as well. Now obviously I know this was developed by a different developer, so the handling is going to be different, but my god, controlling Lightning, he is so sensitive to drive around, it's absolutely ridiculous. Perhaps I just didn't play the game long enough to get used to it, but I just found it very difficult to control what he's doing when you press the D-pad and he just turns on an instant. Very sharply as well, might I add. Anyway, let's talk reviews for this game. So the overall Metacritic score for the DS version is 58 out of 100, but there's such a mixed bag of reviews here. They range from 80 all the way down to 41. Some people absolutely despise this game, where other people are really impressed with what it did. I'm more on the negative side. It's definitely got a fair review score, I'd say, overall, but I wasn't particularly impressed, I must say. This again suffers from the same problem as the first Cars DS game, where I want racing in my Cars game. I don't think that's so much to ask. At least that is actually here, but it is just broken up by loads of random segments of...
So, you know, mixed, let's call it mixed reviews.
Okay, so that takes us to the end of our look through the Cars games for the Nintendo DS.
So whilst we're on the topic of licensed games like Cars and Cars 2, let's move on to the tie-in game for the Turbo DreamWorks movie. You know what's faster than a snail? Literally everything. But back in 2013, DreamWorks decided that a snail could be fast enough to star in a summer blockbuster, and be voiced by Ryan Reynolds. Turbo. And like every animated movie from the early 2010s, Turbo didn't just come with a toy line, a Netflix spin-off and a fast food tie-in, it also came with a licensed video game. Well, actually it came with several. Today we're talking about the Nintendo DS version of Turbo Super Stunt Squad, the game that somehow manages to make racing snails slower than real ones. So before we get into the gameplay, I'm going to start off with a little bit of history about the game and the timing of its release. By 2013, the DS was basically on life support. The shovelware flood was at full speed. The 3DS had already been out for 2 years at this point, and publishers like D3 and developers like Taurus Games were cranking out licensed games faster than Turbo himself could ever dream of moving at. It wasn't uncommon to see the same title released across multiple platforms, Wii, 3DS, Xbox 360, all with wildly different versions. And that's the case here. So the Wii, 3DS and DS ports of Turbo Super Stunt Squad were developed by Taurus Games, who are notorious for cranking out licensed titles for different properties such as Rise of the Guardians, Spider-Man, and Scooby-Doo. The game was also released on Wii U, PS3 and Xbox 360, and this was developed by Monkey Bar Games and was a different game entirely. So when you first boot up the game, you're greeted by the title screen being read out loud by Snoop Dogg.
Turbo! Super Stunt Squad, baby! Coming at you.
That's it. No story, no intro, just Snoop Dogg saying the game's title. Because that's right, Snoop Dogg reprises his role from the film, and he's one of only 2 voice actors to do so, alongside Ben Schwartz, who you may know as the movie Sonic the Hedgehog. Anyway, aside from this one voice line, it's just a static logo and the word START, which is already a red flag. There's basically zero effort to connect the game to its source material. I mean, hey, I'm pretty sure even the B-movie game managed to shove in a few cutscenes, but Turbo, he gets a JPEG image. The menus look like something straight out of a Flash game. There's no flair, no music that makes you feel like you're in a racing world, just generic looping background noise. And there's no story mode either, so if you haven't seen the film, and for some reason decided to buy this game, good luck understanding why these snails are drifting through taco restaurants. So how does Turbo actually play? In theory, it's a simple kart racer. You pick a snail, pick one of 3 cups, and race through a handful of tracks. You accelerate, you brake, you try to drift around corners. It's pretty standard stuff. But the moment you try to turn, you realize that something is deeply, deeply wrong. The controls feel like you're steering through super glue, which is ironic because the whole point of this game is to feel fast. Drifting feels uncontrollable when it actually decides to work, and it's almost impossible to make tight turns without either flying off the track or just hitting into the corner. And don't worry, no, the game knows you're going to do this. That's why the devs decided to add a dedicated respawn button. That's not a feature of good design, ladies and gentlemen, that's just a panic button. Even worse though, the physics make no sense. Sometimes you'll clip through walls, other times you'll just fall into the void for no reason. It's like the game's gravity system forgot it was supposed to be consistent. This is the kind of game where half your race time is spent recovering from the last mistake the game made for you. Now, visually, this game is rough. Even for a late DS game, this looks quite bad. The textures are flat, the colours are muddy, and the environments all blend together. When the frame rate tanks, and it will, a lot, it's usually because more than 2 things are happening on screen at once. That's right, the DS can handle full Mario Kart DS matches at a solid frame rate, but Turbo Super Stunt Squad drops frames like it's allergic to movement, and snails. And I would be willing to bet money that the 3DS version is exactly the same, except with a 3D slider that probably doesn't even really work for this game. Yikes. So let's talk about the racers. You get a small handful of snails from the movie, but they all control the same. There's no difference in speed, weight, or handling, just different shells that claim to affect those stats. Although having tried pretty much every shell that Turbo has, it made no difference whatsoever. And if you were hoping for character banter or personality, prepare for disappointment. The only flavour these snails have comes from one-liners that repeat every 10 or so seconds, and half the time they barely even make sense to what's going on.
Not bad, Garden Snail.
Turbo! That is hot!
After about 2 races, if that, you'll wish you could mute them, but unfortunately, that's not an option. Here's where the title becomes false advertising though. Super Stunt Squad, there are exactly 4 stunts. When you go off a ramp, you press a direction on the D-pad, and that's it. Each direction gives you a different item, a tomato to grow in size, taco shells for defense, a pepper shaker for offense, and a boost. There are no combos, no timing system, no risk or reward, just one press and two possible results. One where you land the trick, and one where the game bugs out and sends you flying.
Yeah! Well, alright!
Now, to be honest, there's absolutely no point using any of the other items in this game except the boost. The tomato allows you to break through parts of the environment that have tomato symbols on them, the taco shells didn't work for me once as no one ever attacked me anyway, and the pepper shaker seemingly does nothing. So the boost is your best option, just fly off in front and keep the lead. It's the easiest way to play the game. And no matter which snail you pick from, they all perform the exact same 4 stunts. It's basically a power-up system disguised as a stunt feature. I mean, the damn banana peels from Mario Kart feel more dynamic than the entire stunt and item mechanic in this game. It's just ridiculous. The one shining glimmer of creativity here though, is the track design. They're set in everyday environments, a kitchen, a restaurant, a back garden, but scaled up to make the snails feel tiny. On paper, that's quite clever. Racing across a taco counter or up the wall of a diner does sound quite fun. But in execution, everything looks exactly the same. The camera angle doesn't help at all, the environments lack any detail, and it's hard to tell what's the track and what's background. Genuinely, some of these tracks are so poorly designed, I got confused about where I was supposed to go. Even when the concept does shine through briefly, the performance and the visuals just drag it right back down. So the game has a measly 3 cups to offer, and some extras like time trials, and when you complete those 3 cups, a mirror mode, where you can play the same awful tracks, but this time in reverse. And that's it, really. There's no online multiplayer, no local play, not even download play, which for a kart racer on the DS, just feels borderline criminal. There are a few unlockable shells, as I mentioned, for each racer that slightly tweak handling, but they're hardly worth the effort, because those supposed tweaks have like no impact on the gameplay whatsoever. So once you've seen all 3 cups, you've basically experienced the entire game. And by the way, you can complete those 3 cups in less than an hour. If you start this game at the same time as watching the Turbo film, you will literally finish the game before the film ends. That is absolutely criminal. To be fair, Turbo Super Stunt Squad wasn't just on DS. The console versions, such as the 360 and PS3, as I said, are completely different games. More like skate park stunt games than racers. And while they weren't good either, at least they tried to do something distinct. The DS version though, it's like the team got halfway through building a Mario Kart clone, and just went, that'll do, and just called it a day. It's a time capsule of an era when every animated film had to have a game, no matter the quality or context. Now, in terms of critical response, none of the tourist developed versions of this game have enough reviews to generate a Metacritic score, but the 3DS version, which is the same as the DS version, has 3 different reviews. The official Nintendo magazine gave it 21 out of 100, Pocket Gamer UK gave it 30 out of 100, and Nintendo Life were much more generous, with a 40 out of 100. But that would have put this in a very negative review bracket for its meta score. Now, in terms of sales figures, the game didn't really do that well either, with the DS version specifically only shifting about 40,000 units, and this is per VG charts. So now the time has come to rank Turbo Super Stunt Squad on our worst racing games tier list. Now, for me, there was no other place this could fit in other than so bad it's good. I mean, this is a DS racing game where you race snails, and one of them's voiced by Snoop Dogg, but it's also completely broken. How could I put it in any other tier? It's just, oh god. Anyway, Turbo Super Stunt Squad definitely isn't the worst DS racer ever made, but it's definitely not good either. There's potential buried underneath all the clunky controls and flat visuals. The concept of tiny snails racing through everyday environments is genuinely quite good, But it's all squandered by poor execution, lack of polish, and absolutely no connection to what made the movie kinda work. If you're a kid who just watched the film in 2013, maybe you'd get a kick out of it for an hour or two, but for everyone else, this is just another casualty in the long line of rushed license games. So moving away from Turbo, let's have a look at the Need for Speed releases on the console, because oh boy, there were quite a few of them. When people talk about Need for Speed, the Nintendo DS is almost never part of that conversation. The focus is usually on the PS2 classics, the 360 era, or maybe the PSP entries if handhelds come up at all. But between 2005 and 2009, the Nintendo DS received 6 different Need for Speed games, all developed by multiple studios, and all trying fairly different approaches to cramming a high-speed racing franchise onto a dual-screen handheld with a D-pad. Some of them are surprisingly ambitious, some of them are genuinely quite bad, and one of them feels like the developers finally figured out what Need for Speed should look like on Nintendo hardware. Today we're going through every Need for Speed game released on the Nintendo DS in release order, focusing specifically on those versions, not the PSP or other consoles, and breaking down how each one looks, plays, and holds up today. So without further ado, our DS journey starts in 2005 with Need for Speed Underground 2. Developed by Pocketeers, who also brought us the Need for Speed Underground 2 Game Boy Advance port, and right away this game deserves credit for just the ambition alone. This is the very first Need for Speed game on the system, and rather than cutting things back to bare bones racing, the developers attempted to recreate the entire Underground 2 experience, customization, progression, and all. Visually, it's serviceable, car models are basic but recognizable, environments do the job, but you will notice a fair bit of track pop-in, especially at higher speeds. Objects appear close to the camera, which can be distracting during longer races, and there are longer races. Handling, though, is where things do get a bit mixed. It's certainly not awful, but it's not particularly good either. The physics feel quite floaty, cars don't always behave the way you expect, you can feel the engine struggling to simulate grip, weight transfer, and collisions all at the same time. Speaking of collisions, the collision detection itself isn't particularly good. You'll sometimes clip through walls and barriers won't always stop you properly, and traffic interactions feel frustratingly inconsistent. But where the game really shines, in my opinion, is the customization. Of course, console Need for Speed Underground 1 and 2 had very in-depth customization systems that really made the games, and somehow Underground 2 DS manages to preserve a surprisingly deep customization system. Visual mods, performance upgrades, and paint tools, it's all pretty good stuff. For a first attempt on the hardware, it's rough around the edges, yeah, sure, but it's also clearly trying. Now, in terms of critical response, the Underground 2 DS port would go on to get pretty mixed reviews. It currently holds a 65 out of 100 on Metacritic, which isn't the worst ever, but it's certainly not that good either. Critics praise the depth that the game went to for a handheld port, but also criticise the difficulty and the fact that there's a lot of graphical pop-in. But overall, I think this is a pretty decent handheld experience. According to VG charts, the game would go on to sell over 100,000 units, which wasn't bad considering Underground 2 actually launched the year before everywhere else, just the DS port came out in 2005. Now, speaking of 2005, that brings us nicely to our next entry. So, this is Need for Speed Most Wanted for the DS, releasing later in 2005 and developed by Sideswiped Studios. This, in my opinion, is where things definitely fall apart. This game is infamous for a reason. Visually, it's a massive downgrade from Underground 2, the car models lack detail, the environments are bland, and the overall presentation just feels rushed. Even for DS standards at the time, it's quite unimpressive. I actually did a full Worst Racing Games episode covering Need for Speed Most Wanted DS, so I'm not going to go on and on about it because I've already spent 15 minutes of an actual video talking about it. But the basic gist, guys, is it's really not good. The real issue with it is how it plays. Handling feels stiff and incredibly awkward, the races lack any sense of intensity, and the game basically completely fails to capture what made Most Wanted special on other platforms. That constant sense of tension from police chases and risk-reward gameplay. You know, what's not in this one? Police pursuits do exist, but they're stripped down to the point where they barely matter anyway. The AI behaviour is inconsistent, the collisions feel unpredictable, and the whole experience is just incredibly disconnected. There's no real excitement here, and that's the worst thing a Need for Speed game can possibly be. Boring. This isn't just a bad version, it's arguably the weakest Need for Speed game on the Nintendo DS, and one of the weakest entries in the franchise overall, ever, in history. If Underground 2 felt ambitious but somewhat flawed, Most Wanted DS feels like something that was pushed out just to hit a release window. But then again, this is EA, and I don't know what we expected from the developer of games such as Alvin and the Chipmunks and My Spanish Coach. Now, in terms of critical response for Most Wanted, as I'm sure you can imagine, they weren't particularly nice. The game holds a 45 out of 100 on Metacritic, making this one of the lowest reviewed games in the series. The game would go on to sell better than Underground 2 though, having shifted over 250,000 units in its lifetime. So I'm sorry to those 250,000 people that bought this game because you must have been so disappointed. Now moving on to 2006. Thankfully, this year gave us Need for Speed Carbon Own the City, and this game marked a massive turnaround. It was developed by Exient Entertainment, and it's the first DS Need for Speed that truly feels confident in itself. Visually, it's a pretty big step up, pop-in is largely gone, environments look more cohesive, and the car models, in my opinion, look pretty good. It's still obviously a DS game, but it's a good looking DS game. One of the biggest improvements is the sense of speed. This game feels unbelievably fast at times. The camera, the motion blur, and track design work together to sell speed in a way that the earlier DS titles just didn't. And I mean, this is a series called Need for Speed, so it's about time. Carbon DS also introduces team mechanics similar to the PSP version, so you can recruit teammates into your gang who assist during races, such as drafting you for speed boosts or tackling opponents. Though the system doesn't function quite as smoothly as it does on more powerful hardware. Most of the time they just crash into you. Customization remains solid, but one standout feature for me is the bottom screen dashboard. The DS's second screen becomes a customizable car interior. Gauges, layouts, visual flair, and it's a genuinely clever use of the hardware. The soundtrack is strong, the story is absolutely ridiculous in that mid-2000s Need for Speed way, and overall the game just oozes personality and charm. Quick story spoiler warning, but it is ridiculous and I have spoken about it on the channel before with my PSP video, but the gist is you are in a race with other people and amongst them is your brother gets hit by a truck, he dies, and then it turns out that you were the one that instigated this, but you didn't know that because you were in the coma from the crash. The whole thing is just absolutely ridiculous, but it is fantastic. This is the point where Need for Speed on DS stops feeling like a compromised spin-off and starts feeling like a proper entry built with the system in mind. This game also fared pretty well with critics, holding a 70 out of 100 Metascore, which is pretty good going, still in the mixed or average, but better than its predecessors. Carbon Own the City would also go on to sell just over 200,000 copies for the Nintendo DS, so pretty good going as well. So moving on into 2007, and next up we have Need for Speed ProStreet, once again developed by Exient Entertainment. Just like its console counterpart, ProStreet represents a bit of a tonal shift. Gone is the illegal street racing fantasy. Instead, everything is event-based, structured, and more grounded in realism and tracks. Visually, it's a bit of a mixed bag. The car models, to me, don't look good, like at all. They're blocky and lack any detail, but the tracks themselves are surprisingly well done with some decent variety and clarity. The sense of speed is still pretty strong, especially in the drag races and the high-speed circuits. Handling is more restrained and deliberate, aiming for realism, or at least as realistic as you can get using a DS D-pad. Events are split mostly between circuit races, time trials, and drag races, with a damage system layered on top. So if you push too hard, or you're just really bad like me, you'll end up racking up repair bills, which adds a strategic element not seen in the earlier DS entries. The drag races were a good standout for me because they were surprisingly in-depth for a DS entry. The licensed soundtrack for the game is solid, and while ProStreet DS doesn't have the flash of carbon, it does something arguably more important. It commits fully to its identity. This is easily the most different Need for Speed on the DS, and whether that works for you depends entirely on how much you like the ProStreet formula. But if you want a more realistic racing game on the Nintendo DS, then just go and play Grid, because that DS port is surprisingly solid. Now, in terms of critical response, ProStreet DS actually holds the highest score out of the games we've looked at so far, with a 74 out of 100 on Metacritic. Just one more point and that would have put it in the positive bracket rather than mixed or average, but, sucks to suck, I guess. In terms of sales, ProStreet didn't sell as well as its predecessors, but the DS version did still shift over 100,000 copies, so not bad going for a DS spin-off. So we are now in the year 2008, and in this year we got Need for Speed Undercover, and this version was developed by Firebrand Games. Visually, things improve again. The car models look pretty good, the tracks are cleaner, though some pop-in does return. Gameplay shifts back towards traditional street racing, which immediately feels more familiar, though by this point the formula is starting to feel a bit tired. So the game starts me off with a Volkswagen Golf, which seems to be a running joke with these DS ports because every single one of them does the exact same thing, except Underground 2, where it gives you the option of a Golf and one other car, and just for the sake of it I chose the Golf anyway. Thankfully, progression is faster here, so you don't have to suffer with the starter car for too long before unlocking something better. Handling is pretty solid in my opinion, the collisions feel more consistent, and the sense of speed is still good. But there's just not very much that stands out. Undercover DS isn't bad, it's not broken, it's not offensive, just to me it's forgettable. It feels like a very safe middle-of-the-road entry that exists purely because it had to, not because there was a good idea there. The developer of Undercover DS was Firebrand Games, as I mentioned, and they were pretty damn good at putting racing games on the DS. They gave us Race Driver, Create and Race, Ferrari Challenge, Grid, TrackMania DS, and all of them were both impressive ports of console versions, or just surprisingly good handheld races. Now, in terms of critical response, Need for Speed Undercover across the board is one of the lower reviewing games in the series, but the DS version specifically holds a 59 out of 100 on Metacritic, which incredibly is actually the same as the console version on PS3, so there we go. At least they were consistent, I guess. The game would also go on to sell pretty well with just shy of 250,000 copies sold. Again, all these stats are from VG charts. Anyway, Firebrand Games would get one more chance to develop a Need for Speed game for the Nintendo DS, which brings us nicely into the next year. So the year is 2009, and we finally get Need for Speed Nitro. This is the only Need for Speed game designed specifically for Nintendo hardware, being released exclusively on the Nintendo DS and also the Nintendo Wii. From the moment I booted this game up, I could tell this one was a bit different. The visuals are super bright, they're colourful, and they're somewhat stylized, leaning hard into an arcade aesthetic that fits the DS perfectly. Cars are a bit cartoony, environments pop with colour, and everything just feels super energetic. Handling is extremely arcade focused, drifting is exaggerated, the physics are loose, and realism is basically thrown out the window entirely. And honestly, it works. The game can get overwhelming, there can be a lot happening on screen, and the frame rate does dip, but the sheer chaos to me is part of the appeal. There's also this weird thing in the races where you drive through these rings and it paints the city or buildings you're driving through or around the colour of your car with your logo, and I don't know why that's there, but it's kinda cool. The tracks are varied, the soundtrack is excellent, and the moment Bonkers by Dizzy Rascal hits the menu, you know exactly what kind of game you're in for. I recently picked up the Nintendo Wii version of this game as well, with the intention of giving Need for Speed Nitro its own dedicated video, so apologies if I'm being a little bit light on this one, but it's because I'm saving myself for the full experience. Anyway, in terms of critical response, Nitro for the Nintendo DS currently holds a 70 out of 100 on Metacritic, which is just 1 point higher than its Wii counterpart. Need for Speed Nitro would go on to be the best-selling Need for Speed game for the system, most likely because it was strongly pushed as the DS exclusive one. So this one would go on to sell just shy of 400,000 units, which is pretty good going. It is important to note that Nitro would go on to receive an expansion the following year, or should I say an expanded re-release the following year for the DSi store called Need for Speed Nitro X. It's the same game with just some additional content. So looking back, the Nintendo DS Need for Speed lineup is messy, it's inconsistent, but it's actually quite fascinating. There's ambition, failure, recovery, experimentation, and finally some confidence. Some of these games are rough, some of them are genuinely quite good, and one of them feels like a blueprint for how handheld NFS should have evolved. So now let's take a look at EA's other major racing franchise on the system, Burnout. Spoiler warning, this game is rough. What happens if you take the first few Burnout games and cram them onto a DS console? Well, this happens. So yes, today we are playing Burnout Legends, specifically Burnout Legends for the DS, because the PSP version is actually a good game. So the Nintendo DS version was developed by Visual Impact, published by EA, and released across November and December of 2005. Now, it's interesting to note that Visual Impact actually had a history of developing racing games for Nintendo's previous handheld consoles, the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color, with games such as Corvette, Taxi 2 and 3, MotoGP, and Suzuki Extreme Racing. Their Game Boy Advance outings actually had some fairly decent 3D visuals for that console, but unfortunately it kinda just looks the same on the DS in Burnout Legends. So what is Burnout Legends? Well, Burnout Legends is essentially a culmination of the first 3 Burnout games crammed onto a handheld console. Now on the PSP this works very well, and in fact the PSP has many more maps than the DS version does. So Legends primarily pulls maps from Burnout 2 and 3, but does have a map from Burnout 1 as well. Although in terms of the actual gameplay, it was essentially designed to play exactly the same as Burnout 3 Takedown, which up to that point was the most successful game in the series. Now the main game mode in Burnout Legends is of course again the World Tour, which can be broken down into 7 different game types. Now before we get into each of those, we first need to discuss the actual handling of the cars and the way they play, because let me tell you, it's not good. So in terms of controls, Burnout Legends is fairly simple. You hold A to go, you hold B to brake, you use the D-pad to steer, you can press X to look behind you, and the right bumper button is your boost. Sounds easy, right? Well, wrong, idiot. It's not. Burnout Legends has many problems, but one of the biggest issues is the fact that there's no real drift mechanic. There's no button to start drifting. It just kind of sometimes does. When you turn into a corner and you turn long enough, it kind of turns into a drift, but the problem is you have to overcompensate for this by turning so early that it requires pixel perfect precision every corner, which is just not possible when you've got other racers and AI traffic around as well. Excluding maybe the 2 Formula 1 cars in the game, pretty much most of the cars feel the same handling wise, and they all feel like bricks on wheels. Turning around corners is just the most painful thing you could possibly ever experience, and it just really shouldn't be. As I was playing some of the tracks in the game, especially the ones from Burnout 3 because those are the ones I've spent the most time with, I kind of thought, wow, I don't remember these tracks being this hard. And the reason being is because in Burnout 3 you can actually turn the fucking car. Anyway, let's discuss the World Tour game modes. So first of all, you've just got your standard race across any of the tracks with a few other racers at a time. The first thing you'll do in the World Tour is play a race, and immediately this is where the cracks start to show, less than like a minute into your playthrough. 2 more glaring issues became immediately apparent to me once I actually started playing the game, and one of those is that the AI are really stupid. They just crash into anything, and the cars take ages to respawn as well, so you're very likely to just crash through no fault of your own because they're just blocking the whole road. The other, and I would say more irritating issue, is the collision detection in this game is probably the worst that I've ever seen in a racing game. It is terrible. About 30 seconds into my first ever race, I went past a bus, probably leaving the safe minimum distance that you would in the real world, and I just flipped. Just crashed, that was it. And I had no idea why.
That's quite big.
And bearing in mind, one of the mechanics in this game to get boost is to have near misses with traffic. How do you do that? You'd have to swerve like 10 meters around anything, because personally I'd be way too scared to go even a little bit close to any of the other cars. Anyway, more on the collision detection later. So the race, they're just standard, typically 3 laps, nothing really else to say. It just feels like a poor man's imitation of Burnout 3, which is pretty much the same for the entire game. Anyway, next up, and very similar to race, we have the Eliminator, which is just the standard race, but whoever's in last after each lap is eliminated. That's it. No different, same problems. Moving on. Next up we have Face Off, which pits you up against one of the legend cars in the game for a one-on-one. These are typically 2 laps long, but still follow the standard race procedures, but at the very least, at the end, you do get to unlock a cool car. Yes! So next up we have the Burning Lap, and that is the time trial mode that lets you try out a bunch of different cars before you actually unlock them, such as the F1 car, the hot rods, so on and so forth. And these used to be a fairly decent challenge in Burnout 3, but here, half the fun of getting to use the hot rod early on a burning lap was to learn how it handled, play the game a bit differently, but here it just handles pretty much exactly the same as every other car in the game. So yeah, it's still hard because you're still dealing with the terrible steering. The burning laps in Burnout Legends have the same postcard unlock system as they did in Burnout 3. When you get all the postcards, you get a car. Anyway, moving on, next up we have the ever iconic Road Rage, my all-time favourite game mode in Burnout, and to be honest, one of my favourite game modes just ever. I love it, I love Burnout. And you'll be pleased to know that here... No, I'm just kidding, it's terrible. It really doesn't work. This game purely relies on the collision detection that just doesn't work. The only way, and I mean this, the only way you are guaranteed to get a takedown when you ram into a car is if you boost directly straight without steering into the back of the car, and that should just about take them out straight away. If you go at a slight angle, it will for some reason think you're on the side of the car and steer them either way, but 9 times out of 10 they won't hit the barrier that you're trying to hit them into anyway. So if you want to complete the road rages fast, just go into the back of the cars. Yes, you probably won't get your signature takedowns, but at least you can actually get through the game. It's a shame because there are small glimpses of a good game here, especially in the road rage mode, because on the odd moment that the collision detection actually works properly, you get some very satisfying takedowns. And just as a side note, the signature takedowns are exactly the same as they were in Burnout 3 Takedown. There's just less of them. Anyway, Road Rage typically has a 3-minute timer, and to get gold for most of the game you have to get 10 takedowns until you get to the Supercar Leagues and you have to get 12. If you want to play the Road Rage mode in this game without the time limit, you can do it as a single event instead, and then it's just until you run out of health. Okay, so next up we've got my least two favourite modes in the game. Firstly, we have Pursuit, which has you playing as a police car and you just have to chase down and crash out one single car. But unfortunately, because this game mode would be very easy if you could just take them out in one hit, they have a health bar and you can't really crash them into anything, and at numerous points as you drive around the track, you will quite blatantly see the car you're chasing just drive through cars and get no damage. It won't even be afflicted. It's like it ghosts its way through stuff. Very weird. The best way to play this game is to just grind alongside the car you're chasing down, because that gets the health down drastically. Don't waste your time boosting, ramming. Just grind alongside it. It'll be a much easier experience for you. Anyway, they're not designed to be very long, but Pursuit is probably the least fun I had in this game, and that's saying something because I didn't really have much fun with this game at all. But again, on the plus side, once you do it, you do unlock the police car from that category. Yes! However, the one annoying thing about the police car is that no matter what game mode you use the police car in, the siren is stuck on permanently. So if you happen to do a Grand Prix with the police car, for 3 races back to back you are stuck with a siren that you cannot turn off. Anyway, the last game mode is of course the Crash mode. It's never been my personal favourite across any of the Burnout games. I've always enjoyed the high-speed crashy racing a lot more, but it functions fine here, I guess. The same issues with collision detection are very apparent here. However, the other thing that's quite apparent here is that the physics engine doesn't really work either, because you could tap into a car and you'll either fly away into the distance or you just won't move. It's very weird. Speaking of the physics, just as a general point across this game, it feels like they've doubled or even tripled the amount of gravity pushing you down, because at various points in maps on Burnout 3 where you would have taken off into the air, you just cling to the ground like you've been stuck to it. It's very weird. I mean, maybe that's a good thing because the game is already unpredictable enough. I don't think I'd want to start flying about in the air as well. Anyway, there's only one other game mode outside of World Tour, and that's just standard time attack that you can do on any track, as opposed to the burning laps. Nothing notable, it's just a time attack mode. Now, on top of this, Burnout Legends also featured some multiplayer modes that unfortunately I wasn't able to test, but they did make use of the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. So you had 3 options to choose from. You had a challenge race, where you could play against a friend in an attempt to collect their collector car. There's Double Impact, where you both fight for crash money and use crash breakers to help defeat each other. And then Party Crash. You can play solo or in teams. And that's for up to 6 players, so good luck finding 5 other friends who also own Burnout Legends. Or in my case, good luck finding 5 other friends. Now, whilst these multiplayer modes do sound good, what's quite frustrating is that there's actually a few cars that are locked behind the multiplayer. There are collector's cars in this game, and for each class there are 5 collector's cars. One of the collector's cars from each class can be earned in the World Tour at random, whilst the other 4 can only be earned in multiplayer. So if you don't have any friends to play with, you can't 100% get every car in the game. Tough luck, buddy. Sucks to be lonely, I guess. Anyway, so let's focus a little bit further on that collision detection. So there are 2 very frustrating things about the collision detection in this game. One is the uncertainty of whether or not you've cleared enough space around a vehicle to get a near miss and to not crash. And the other is when you do crash, because of this wonky detection, the game respawns you in the most ridiculous places. If you crash into a wall going sideways, it might just respawn you back in the wall. If you crash behind another car, or you're near another AI vehicle, it will respawn you and you will immediately crash again. There's just zero thought or effort put into these mechanics that they've just copied from Burnout 3. There was a masterpiece sat right there. Just do what they already did. I don't understand why that's so hard. If you are a big fan of the first few entries in the series and then you play this, firstly, I'm sorry. But second of all, I just had this uncanny feeling the entire time. I knew in my head I was playing Burnout, but it didn't feel quite like Burnout. Sure, you had the crashes, and when you did crash, you could somewhat control your car in the air to try and get an aftertouch takedown. It has all the looks and the supposed mechanics of Burnout, but it just doesn't feel right. Anyway, so as you probably saw at the start of this video, Burnout Legends on the DS did not review very well. The PSP version holds a very, very respectable 86 out of 100 on the Metacritic platform, but the DS version, 38 out of 100. Much, much worse. The user score for the PSP version is also 8.6 out of 10, so very consistent, but the DS user score is a little bit higher than its 38, with a 5.1 out of 10, putting it up into the mixed or average. Still not great. So how well would Burnout Legends go on to sell? Well, the PSP version was a massive hit, selling just shy of 1 million copies, and I believe eventually would end up on the PlayStation Network as well, so you could digitally download this. History did not repeat for the DS version, however. The game would still sell okay. It would go on to sell just shy of 200,000 copies, with the vast bulk of those being in America. These stats are from VG Charts. Overall, Burnout Legends for the DS left me feeling like I'd been on a night out and had one too many. I felt dizzy, confused, tired, and sick. Anyway, that's enough trashing Burnout No, I'm just kidding. It's time to rank the game. There is only one tier that's possibly fitting for Burnout Legends, and unfortunately that's gonna have to be pure evil. Yes, you will be joining Flatout 3 for also disrespecting your fantastic franchise. Oh, yikes. Burnout Legends on the DS is definitely not a good game. So next, let's take a look at a racing game that also isn't very good, but marked certainly an interesting spin-off for its respective franchise. When people talk about Pokémon games, there's usually a very clear hierarchy in everyone's mind. You've got the mainline RPGs, then you've got the beloved spin-offs like Pokémon Snap, Mystery Dungeon, and in my eyes the Pokémon Ranger series. And more, obviously. And then you've got the other ones, the weird ones, the awkward experiments, the titles that exist because someone at Nintendo needed something, well, anything, with Pikachu on the box. And today we're talking about one of the strangest of these Pokémon spin-offs, and that is Pokémon Dash. Released in 2005 as one of the earliest Nintendo DS titles, Pokémon Dash wasn't just a spin-off, it was a statement. Not necessarily a good one, but a statement nonetheless. It was Nintendo basically saying, hey, look what this new touchscreen can do, look how innovative we are, and look, Pikachu is running again. Now, after 20 or so years, to me, Pokémon Dash is something of a punchline. I would put it up there with games like Pokémon Channel and Hey You Pikachu, titles remembered less for how fun they were and more for how weird and awkward they were instead. But here's the thing, Pokémon Dash isn't actually unplayable, it's not broken, it's not even completely without merit, it's just deeply limited, oddly designed and painfully emblematic of early DS growing pains. So let's go back, let's dust off our stylus, stretch our wrists and take a long, honest look at Pokémon Dash. What it tried to be, what it actually was and why it still feels like one of Nintendo's most blatant early cash-ins. To understand Pokémon Dash, you first have to understand the Pokémon spin-off landscape. Spin-offs have always been a gamble. On one end of the spectrum you have genuinely great games. Pokémon Pinball, which somehow turned RNG and reflex-based gameplay into something incredibly addicting. Pokémon Puzzle League honestly had no right being as good as it was, and Pokémon Snap was a game so beloved that fans begged for a sequel for over 2 decades before it finally arrived. But on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the entire Pokémon Rumble series, and Pokémon Channel, which is just a glorified waiting simulator disguised as interactivity. Pokémon Dash kinda falls more into that second category, but with an important caveat. Unlike Channel, Dash actually works. It responds and functions exactly as designed. The problem is that the design itself is kinda what holds it back. So Pokémon Dash was developed by Umbrella, the same devs who brought us Hey You Pikachu and Pokémon Channel and would go on to give us the Pokémon Rumble series. So basically they've developed every single divisive spin-off in the series. Near enough. So Pokémon Dash launched during the very beginning of the Nintendo DS lifecycle, when developers were still figuring out what the system was even really for. Touchscreen controls weren't standardized, dual screen design was experimental, and everyone was just throwing ideas at the wall. And Pokémon Dash was one of the earliest examples of that. This wasn't a racing game because Pokémon needed a racer, it was a racing game because Nintendo kinda needed proof of concept. On paper, Pokémon Dash sounds simple enough. It's a top-down racing game where players control Pikachu as he runs through a series of courses, hitting checkpoints in a specific order before reaching the finish line. The twist? Those checkpoints aren't linear. Instead of a traditional track, Pokémon Dash gives you an open map and says, well, figure it out. Some checkpoints are close, others are across rivers, forests, cliffs, or basically just unreachable terrain. And the game expects you to plan a route, often mid-race, while competing against AI opponents who, of course, know the map by heart, or well, by code. It's a genuinely interesting idea, a non-linear racer where navigation matters as much as speed, but unfortunately that's where things do start to get a bit messy. So let's talk about how you actually control Pikachu. There are no buttons for movement, no D-pad steering, and no analog stick. Instead, you drag the stylus across the touchscreen in the direction you want Pikachu to run. In theory, this turns the DS into a kind of analog control surface. In practice, it turns your hand and kind of the screen into a victim. At first, it was kind of novel. Oh wow, Pikachu runs where I drag. That's kind of neat. Then about 10 minutes later, reality sets in. You are constantly rubbing the stylus across the screen. Up, down, left, right, over and over, every race, every second. And here's the kicker, dragging faster doesn't make Pikachu go faster. No matter how fast you aggressively scribble, Pikachu's speed caps out at, well, a leisurely jog. So all that frantic motion does nothing except tire your wrist. It's not engaging, it's not expressive, it's just kind of repetitive, and when your entire game is built around this single control gimmick, that repetition becomes exhausting very quickly. And I can tell you, emulating this game ain't exactly much fun either, because you're just dragging your cursor across the same small part of the screen over and over again. One of Pokémon Dash's most interesting ideas is also one of its most frustrating. Instead of racing from point A to point B, players must hit checkpoints in a specific order, and these are often scattered all over the map. The game tells you which checkpoint is next, what it doesn't do is tell you how exactly you get there. On the ground, you're given a bare-bones radar on the top screen. That's it, no full map, no route guidance, just vague directional hints. The only way to see the entire course clearly is by hopping into a hot air balloon, like Team Rocket. The balloon is Pokémon Dash's most defining mechanic. At various points in the course, Pikachu can hop into a balloon and float into the air, giving the player a full overhead view of the environment. This sounds helpful, and it is, but there is a catch. While in the balloon, you can't move freely, you drift slowly by swiping the screen, so you're not really moving that fast. The balloon essentially pauses your momentum in exchange for information. This does create an interesting risk-reward dynamic where do you sacrifice time to learn the layout or do you just wing it and hope for the best. The problem is that the game leans too hard into this restriction. Most checkpoints are deliberately placed in ways that require balloon scouting, and because you don't retain a persistent map, you're constantly forced to reorient yourself. The result means more studying and less racing, and in a game called Pokémon Dash, that's a bit of a strange feeling. Now, for the first half of the game, Pokémon Dash is almost laughably easy. The initial set of 25 races can be cleared with minimal effort. The AI is fairly forgiving, the maps are quite simple, and you can brute force most of the races without fully understanding the somewhat simple mechanics. And then you unlock more and suddenly the gloves come off. The AI racers know all the optimal routes, move at maximum speed, don't hesitate, of course never get lost. Meanwhile you're juggling 2 screens, stylus movement, radar interpretation, balloon scouting, and terrain hazards. It doesn't feel challenging in a fun way, it just kind of feels unfair. The game doesn't evolve its mechanics, it just expects mastery without ever truly teaching it. And despite the name Pokémon Dash, this game might as well be called Pikachu Dash, because that's all you get. One character, one moveset, one experience. You race against Pokemon like Meowth and Torchic, but you can never play as them. Even in multiplayer, every player would be Pikachu. This is one of the game's most baffling decisions. I mean, Pokemon spin-offs live and die on variety. But what's more baffling is it's not like there weren't other Pokemon to choose from at this point. I mean, sure, we were still only in Gen 3, but there was like 300 and something Pokemon you could have put in this game. Different Pokemon with different abilities could have added strategic depth, offset control limitations, and maybe even made multiplayer genuinely interesting. Instead, everyone runs the same race the same way and the same every time. For a franchise built on choice, Pokémon Dash offers basically none. Now, even by early Nintendo DS standards, in my opinion, Pokémon Dash is not very pretty. Of course, as it's top down, the environments are all flattened, but it gives like a SNES era look, and if you zoom in, or even out, textures become muddy or pixelated. Pikachu himself is rendered in 3D and looks fine, clearly lifted from earlier Pokemon demos, but he feels visually disconnected from the world around him. Animations are stiff, the run cycles lack fluidity, and overall, the presentation feels much more like a tech demo than an actual polished full-released game. I mean, yeah, sure, it was an early release, but even then, other games are already doing better. Despite all of this, Pokémon Dash isn't completely devoid of good ideas. Certain checkpoints require specific power-ups to access, and some terrain types are hazardous unless you plan ahead. Descending from balloons introduces a surprisingly nuanced risk system where landing angle and speed matter. There is strategy here, it's just buried underneath layers of awkward execution. But when everything clicks, and you've memorized a course, planned a route, and executed it cleanly, the game almost feels good. Emphasis on the almost. Something else I really like about Pokémon Dash is its Game Boy Advance cartridge integration. By inserting a Pokémon GBA game into the bottom of your DS, it could read the save file and create special courses based on the Pokémon in your party. Higher level Pokémon give you more time to complete these challenges, turning your old team into a new gameplay mode. It's a clever concept, which obviously probably didn't get used very much, but still a cool inclusion nonetheless that they didn't have to do. Now, how did Pokémon Dash hold up in terms of its critical response? Well, unfortunately the game holds a generally unfavourable critic score of 46 out of 100 on Metacritic, and an almost just as unfavourable user score with 4.7 out of 10. Now, the game would still sell pretty decently with 750,000 copies shifted worldwide, which isn't terrible, but for a Pokemon game obviously isn't that high. Now, something else I find really interesting when making these videos is to see how much the games that we're playing are valued today in today's, frankly, kind of ridiculous pre-owned market. So, just for a cartridge of Pokemon Dash without the box, it's about £15, which is what I probably would have expected. But for a complete box, you're looking for 40 quid, 40 Great British pounds, for objectively the worst Pokemon spin-off game ever made. I don't really know what I was expecting because that's just classic Pokemon to have the prices just inflate. What's more interesting is looking at the charts showing its evolution of the pricing, and I have to wonder what the hell happened at the end of 2020 into 2021 for the price to suddenly jump from about £15 all the way up to 40. I know prices went up a lot during lockdown, so I'm guessing it probably has something to do with that, but this was actually after lockdown had ended, so... Anyway, moving on. So now the time has come where we have to rank Pokémon Dash on our worst racing games tier list. Now, to be honest, we've actually had a few good games recently, so it's nice to have something that is genuinely not that good again. Pokémon Dash for me is going to sit firmly in the middle tier of being rubbish. It's just not a well-designed game. It has some charm to it, there are some neat ideas to be found, but it's just clunky, it's awkward to control, and honestly, it's aged like old milk. At the end of the day, Pokémon Dash exists basically for one reason: to put Pikachu on the Nintendo DS as fast as possible. And finally, let's take a look at one of the weirdly more ambitious titles for the console. This was when Ferrari attempted a racing sim for the Nintendo DS. When you think of Ferrari, a few things probably come to mind immediately. Speed, luxury, Italian engineering, and let's be honest here, money. Ferrari is a brand that's always been associated with excess, prestige, and performance at the highest possible level. It's the kind of car you see roaring down a Monaco street or sitting behind velvet ropes at a car show. Not exactly something you associate with a plastic handheld from 2004. And yet here we are. Today we are looking at Ferrari Challenge Trofeo Pirelli for the Nintendo DS, a game that attempted to bring authentic Ferrari racing simulation to one of Nintendo's most unconventional platforms. This isn't Mario Kart, this isn't Burnout, it's not even Need for Speed. This is an attempt at a serious licensed Ferrari racing sim on a system better known for brain age and touchscreen minigames. So the question is simple: does Ferrari Challenge actually succeed at delivering a racing experience on the Nintendo DS? Or is it an ambitious handheld port that collapses under the weight of its own realism? Let's find out. To better understand Ferrari Challenge on the DS, you really need to understand the context it released into. By the late 2000s, racing games on home consoles were thriving. Gran Turismo, Forza Motorsport, and even more arcade-leaning titles were pushing realism, physics, and graphic fidelity further every year. Handhelds, on the other hand, struggled. The Nintendo DS was powerful enough for its time, but it was not designed with high-fidelity simulation. Its strengths were creativity, accessibility, and innovation, dual screens, touchscreen controls, stylus input. Racing simulations were not intended for this platform. Outside of Mario Kart DS, which obviously leaned fully into arcade chaos, most DS races were simplified ports or watered down versions of console games. Ferrari Challenge is interesting because it doesn't try to dumb itself down, instead it takes the opposite approach. It attempts to replicate Ferrari's official Trofeo Pirelli racing series, complete with licensed cars, real tracks, and a focus on driving technique rather than spectacle. This wasn't just a Ferrari branded arcade racer slapped together for quick sales, it had Ferrari's official approval literally stamped on the box, and that sets the expectations just kind of a little bit high. So this version of Ferrari Challenge was developed by Firebrand Games and published by System 3, releasing across July and August 2008. We have looked at several Firebrand games on the channel before, as they've ported lots of racing games to the Nintendo DS, as well as developing some specifically for it. We have looked at Race Driver Create and Race, Race Driver Grid, TrackMania DS, Need for Speed Nitro, so on and so forth. They've done a lot. It's not all good, but it's not all bad, so that doesn't set the expectations too high for this game. Booting up Ferrari Challenge on the DS, the first thing I noticed was the tone. There was no flashy intro cinematic, no bombastic soundtrack, no neon menus screaming extreme illegal speed. Instead, everything kind of felt restrained, kind of professional, maybe almost sterile. Menus are clean and functional, the fonts are simple, and the presentation feels closer to a motorsport broadcast than a video game. And honestly, that kind of works. It immediately signals that this is a game that wants to be taken seriously. The title screen music is subtle, the menus load kinda quickly, and the game wastes very little time getting you behind the wheel. But once you actually start racing, the reality sets in, because Ferrari Challenge is asking a lot from a very small screen. So let's talk about the most important part of any racing game: how it feels to drive. Ferrari Challenge uses a traditional control setup, D-pad for steering, face buttons for acceleration and braking. And there's no touchscreen steering gimmick here, which is probably for the best. The handling model leans heavily towards simulation. Cars have weight, momentum matters, braking too late will absolutely punish you. As you'll probably see from the gameplay footage, I got punished a lot. Oversteer is a constant threat if you're sloppy. This is not a game where you can just mash the accelerator and bounce off walls. The corners kind of demand respect, and that's both the game's greatest strength and its biggest weakness. On a large TV or a monitor setup, judging braking distance and corner entry is like second nature. On the Nintendo DS's tiny screen, or emulated, it's a bit harder. Tracks can appear deceptively flat, turns can sneak up on you, and depth perception is somewhat limited. You often find yourself misjudging how fast you can safely take a corner, not because the physics are wrong, but because the visuals don't communicate enough information quickly. Still, when you do get it right, the satisfaction is real. Nailing a clean lap, overtaking AI opponents without too much contact in this game, feels genuinely quite rewarding. This is a game that doesn't hand you the win, you have to earn it. One of the most surprising and frankly best features of Ferrari Challenge Trofeo Pirelli is its training mode. Instead of throwing you straight into championship races, the game introduces you to a structured tutorial system focused on driving fundamentals. You're taught proper braking technique, corner entry and exit, smooth acceleration, overtaking without contact, staying within track limits, or at least that's what it's trying to teach you. Each challenge scores you based on your performance. Clean driving earns points, and mistakes deduct points. And this is important because these mechanics largely disappear once you leave the training mode. The game doesn't hold your hand during the races, there are no glowing race lines, no assist popping up mid-corner. If you didn't pay attention in training, then you're probably going to struggle. But that's what makes the training mode so effective. It feels almost like a driving school, and for a handheld racing game that's kind of rare. In many ways, the training mode to me was more engaging than the main championship itself. Chasing higher scores, refining technique, and mastering each lesson has an almost arcade-like appeal. Ironically, it's where the game feels the most alive. There's a scoring system in the training mode ranked by bronze, silver, or gold, which is based off of how high of a score you get. Don't get me wrong, it's not perfect, but we'll get to why that is a bit later with the AI. Unfortunately, not every idea Ferrari Challenge introduces is a winner. Introducing the card system. As you complete training challenges and just races, you earn collectible cards featuring Ferrari cars with various stats. These cards can be used in a card battle minigame, where you essentially compare stats against another player or the AI. Higher stats win, lower stats lose. And that's it. There's no strategy, no deck building, no meaningful rewards. It feels like a feature that exists purely because someone thought, hey, kids love top trumps. The card game doesn't enhance the racing, it doesn't unlock anything meaningful, and it doesn't really affect progression in a satisfying way. At its best, it's a novelty, but at its worst, it's a complete waste of development time that should have been spent perfecting the AI or just making the game better. This is one of those features that sounds better on paper than it actually plays. Ferrari Challenge does at least deliver when it comes to track variety. There's a respectable selection of real-world circuits and layouts, each with its own character. Some tracks are tight and technical, others favour high-speed straights, and some demand perfect braking zones. You've got tracks like Monza, Spa, Silverstone. Obviously not all of them have the names of the tracks that they actually are, most likely due to licensing, but they are here. And there was something, to me, weirdly interesting about seeing tracks like Spa or Monza on a Nintendo DS. As someone who spent so much time on the F1 games on PC, this just felt a bit weird, but in a cool way. That said, the repetition does set in faster than you'd expect. Why? Because every race uses essentially identical cars. There's no tuning, no tyre compounds, no engine upgrades. You're racing opponents with the same performance ceiling as you, just painted differently. While this ensures fairness, it also strips away long-term depth. once you've mastered the handling model on one of a few different cars, there's very little left to experiment with. So when you're actually out on the track, the game only has one point of view for you to play in, and that is the front bumper view, the one that's quite close to the ground. Now, this does give a good sense of speed, but it would have been nice to have a few different points of view, or at least a third-person point of view, because at the end of the day, this is still a DS game. However, there is a pretty good replay system in place that allows you to view your full race once you've completed it, and it tries to emulate being a TV camera, so it jumps between different points of view from the side, from the back, from your bumper view. It's quite cool. It's a bit janky and car models glitch about in this, and there was actually one replay where the game just broke and my car just stopped driving and turned into a wall, which for the record is not what happened in the actual race, but it's pretty cool that there is a replay system at all here. Now, I did mention some issues with the AI earlier on in the video, and now let's talk about it. The problem with the AI is that, well, it's a mix of the collision detection and just over-aggression. So the collision detection in this game isn't great. You'll see sometimes in the footage that the car glitches about a little bit when it's made contact with another car, and 95% of the time the only person that's going to suffer from this is you, not the AI. There are times when I'm braking around a corner and the AI is behind me, doesn't react to you braking at all, it just continues on its pre-programmed racing line and smashes into the back of you. It's just some traditional classic racing game AI that just doesn't know how to react to anything else around it. It's certainly not the worst AI we've ever seen in this worst racing game series, but it's definitely not the best either. Has its ups, has its downs, but it definitely could have used some more time in the oven. You know, maybe rather than making some pointless top trumps card game mode, we could have had better AI. Visually, Ferrari Challenge is impressive considering the hardware. The car models are okay, they're recognisable, you can tell one Ferrari from another, which isn't always a given on the DS. Tracks curve mostly naturally, elevation changes are usually visible, and the skyboxes are decent and dynamic. But there are compromises. Track surfaces can look blocky, especially mid-corner. Off-road textures resemble something closer to cheese puffs than gravel. Environmental detail is definitely sparse. But there's also no visible car damage, no dents, no scratches, no visual feedback beyond slowing down and occasionally glitching about. This removes a sense of impact and consequence. Still, the game runs smoothly for the most part. I had the odd frame rate dip when going up a hill with a bunch of cars on the screen at the same time, but for the most part, it's good. And in my opinion, the stability matters more than flashy visuals, especially on a DS game. Now, the sound design in this game is a bit of a mixed bag. Engine noises are surprisingly convincing for DS hardware, each car has a distinct tone, and rev changes are communicated somewhat clearly. Tyre squeal exists, but it certainly lacks punch, and it's pretty much the same 1 second sound on loop. Crashes feel muted, as I've mentioned, but the music is minimal and unobtrusive, which suits the simulation vibe, but certainly doesn't leave any lasting impression. So overall the audio does its job, but it never really elevates the experience. So Ferrari Challenge is not an easy game. Mistakes are punished, consistency is rewarded, and the AI opponents, although quite irritating, are still competent. But once you finish the championship and unlock everything, the replay value drops off sharply, like off a cliff. Without customization, online competition, or, deep progression systems, there's little reason to keep coming back unless you genuinely love the driving. So how does Ferrari Challenge on the DS hold up in terms of its critical response? Well, on Metacritic, the game holds a score of 65 out of 100, putting it in the mixed or average zone, with high reviews as high as 80 out of 100 and lows of 58 out of 100. So nothing super jarring, but nothing particularly good either. Critics praised the game's visuals, but also criticised the lack of content, options, and damage. Now, unfortunately, this version of Ferrari Challenge did not sell well at all, with the game roughly estimated to have sold about 40,000 copies, which is not very good. Interestingly, the Wii version of this game would go on to sell 500,000 copies, which to me is actually kinda crazy. Anyway, those stats are from VG Charts. Okay, so now the time has come to rank Ferrari Challenge DS on our worst racing games tier list. Now, I had to sit and think about this one for a while because there were parts of this game that I really enjoyed. Once I was up ahead of the AI and just flying around the tracks by myself, it was very entertaining, but getting past those AI and dealing with the buggy collision detection is quite frustrating, which stops me from putting it right in the top category. So for me, I think Ferrari Challenge on the DS is going to go in the meh category, just one down from the actually not that bad, because with a few tweaks, this game could have been really good. To me, this is a fascinating game. It's ambitious, it's technically impressive, and it's quite niche. It doesn't chase mass appeal, it doesn't simplify its systems, and it doesn't compromise its identity. But those same strengths also limit it. The small screen struggles to communicate speed and depth, the lack of customization certainly hurts the long-term engagement, the card system feels completely pointless, and the absence of online play is a bit disappointing. So there you have it, the weirder side of the Nintendo DS racing games. Oh boy, there's so much more to this console than just Mario Kart. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thanks and goodbye.